Last week in our Wonderful Day in the Lord broadcast, we took a pretty good look at the second coming of Christ as found in Revelation 19. And we've seen a lot of good things. We saw the names of Christ, we saw the victories of Christ, we saw the descriptions of Christ, and we now have looked at two of the three great victories that are necessary before Christ sets up his kingdom on earth, which will be found in chapter 20 and going on down. The first enemy that had to be defeated was the armies of the world, all the human armies that have come out to oppose him. And then secondly, there is the Antichrist and the false prophet who have led this rebellion in the tribulation period against Christ. They have now been defeated. There's one final enemy that is left standing that the Lord must defeat, have victory over before he sets up his kingdom, and that is the devil himself, who is behind all rebellion and deception against Christ. And we pick up that story in chapter 20. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven holding a key of the abyss and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold of the dragon, the serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan. So there's no question about who we're talking about here. This is the devil himself, Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. And he threw him into the abyss and shut it and sealed it over him so that he would not deceive the nations any longer until the 1,000 years were completed. After these things, he will be released for a short time. So Satan has always opposed the Lord all the way back to before the Garden of Eden, when Satan rebelled against him in the heavenly places. Satan seemed to have been one of the greatest, if not the greatest, angelic being the Lord ever created. That wasn't enough for Satan, and so he rebelled against the Lord and took perhaps if chapter 12 of the book of Revelation is a description of that, took about a third of the angels with him in that rebellion. And those angels have been demonic creatures that have plagued the earth ever since. But all that is over. Satan is now being defeated by the Lord, and we find that the Lord himself doesn't actually imprison the devil. He sends an angel to do it. And so an angel is powerful enough to defeat the devil here. He takes him and he puts him in the abyss. As we saw last time, that seems to be a holding tank, a prison house of some sort for demonic creatures. We remember back in the Gospels that some of the demons that Jesus cast out pleaded with him not to be cast into the abyss because apparently there was no release from the abyss. They wanted to be cast into pigs or something else. And the Lord accommodated them on occasion. But here Satan is cast there, and he is not going to get out. We find that he is bound. We find that he's shut up. He's found that it's sealed over. And the reason why is so he could no longer deceive the nations. So as the kingdom age begins, Satan is not allowed to roam the earth. He's not allowed to deceive people or nations. That's been his great weapon all these years. He's done other awful things, but his great weapon is deception. And he's no longer allowed to do that. And we find very clearly he's going to be there for 1,000 years. 6 different times in the first 7 verses of Revelation 20. This time frame is given as 1,000 years. Some like to make this metaphorical or symbolic. But when you say something 6 different times in 7 verses, that seems to be a pretty literal thing. And so we take it to be the 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth will be a period of time when Satan himself can no longer deceive. That does not mean that sin is not around. People will still have sin natures, those who are born on the earth, and we'll see that next time. They will have sin natures. They will have to be redeemed from sin, and some will rebel against him as well. But Satan is no longer allowed to externally deceive the nations. And that's the purpose that we're given here in verse 3. We do find, however, that he is released after this period of time, and we see that he comes forth in verse 7, and he comes forth to do what? As soon as he's out of prison, he's come forth in verse 8 to deceive the nations. He's right back at it. He hasn't learned anything. He hasn't changed. He comes back to the earth to deceive the nations, and the Lord allows one more period of deception on the world by Satan for a short time. We'll see why when we look at this next time, but in the days to come. But for right now, Satan has been bound. All the enemies that have opposed Christ have now been defeated. humanity that opposes him, the Antichrist and the false prophet, and now the devil himself. And now Jesus is in the position to rule with a rod of iron and to set up his kingdom on earth. Will that be a wonderful, wonderful time if you know Christ is your Savior, to be a part of that time of the kingdom age. We're looking forward to it. That ought to give you a wonderful day in the Lord, hadn't it? I hope it does. We'll see you next time.